Recently, I was reflecting on the months after my son was born, my firstborn, and it comes with a mix of emotions. Of course, I was so happy for this beautiful miracle, but also I remember a lot of tears. I remember not being able to describe the feeling that I had, and now I know it as postpartum depression. And so recently, I felt the need to write this down. No one told me. Maybe my friends were protecting me. Maybe my parents didn't remember, but no one told me. No one told me my days, weeks, even months after giving birth to my healthy baby boy, my firstborn, would be filled with so many tears. Tears I couldn't control. Tears I didn't know where they were coming from. Guilt in the pit of my stomach. How could I, after losing 2 babies before him, be anything but over the moon happy? But the tears came, sometimes in silence, sitting alone in the middle of the night nursing my little boy, sometimes sitting in public, in the pizza shop, embarrassed, too proud to say anything. No one told me. It was postpartum depression. My husband didn't even recognize the signs at the time. I didn't even know how to describe it, and I thought, not me, I'm not going through this. But it was postpartum depression. Recently, my friend and colleague and new mama, Nusha Roy, was brave enough to record her own story.
But just a few short months ago, I could barely recognize myself. The lowest point, I was crumpled in the closet. I was frozen. I was listening through the floor to the rest of my family, laughing with our son while I was upstairs bawling by myself. I didn't want to be around my family. I didn't want to be around my baby, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm a monster.
And then previously, I've shared the story of Sam Shocker. She's the host of Daily Blast Live, and her journey through postpartum depression.
I'm going through it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk to anyone. I was struggling to bond. Finally, when I realized I was crying more than I should, when I was disconnected, when I was eating my dinner alone in the basement, I knew something was off, and I was like, I can't live like this anymore, and I had suicidal thoughts.
So that brought me to today, a 4-part series on postpartum depression to have real, raw, honest conversations about what these new mamas are going through, what husbands can do. We're going to talk to doctors and pediatricians about what they're doing to recognize the signs early and local organizations that are here to help. Well, we're already all the tears right now. I know.
How am I going to get through
Oh
this
my
conversation?
gosh. So of course, Anusha and Sam are joining me now, and I want to thank you both so much for sharing your stories because it's going to help so many people. So Sam, you were talking about how you didn't want to talk about it. Why didn't you want to talk about it?
It was such a weird juxtaposition for me because I used to work on a show with Dr. Drew Pinsky all about mental health. So I was educated in postpartum depression. But depression, at least for me, and I feel like I can speak for most people that suffer from PPD or depression, is when it hits you, you're so tired, you just don't care. You don't want to deal with it, you don't want to acknowledge the feelings, and then months and months and months go by. I was actually on air covering Ivanka Trump talking about her issues, and that's the first time I admitted it. On air. Isn't that weird? Wow. But treatment works, and it worked for me.
And we're going to talk about that because everyone's journey through this can be very different. What made you want to share your story?
You know, I think I wanted to share because it was somebody else telling me I'd gone through the same thing that made me realize that it was okay and I can handle it. It was my mom who sat me down. She was still with us. You know, this was within about a month of my son being born, and it was just a mess, you know, and I totally relate. I didn't want to handle, I knew something was wrong. I didn't want to handle it because I was like, I'm too overwhelmed with everything else. She sat down and she told me, she's like, you know, I had the same thing when your sister was born. Wow. And she goes, and I was like, I feel all of these terrible, terrible things. And she goes, I felt the same thing. And I was like, wait, what? And then she goes, let's call your doctor. And my husband said, let's call your doctor. And the fact that somebody was brave enough to tell me that you're not alone, I have felt the same thing. I was like, well, let me also say that to other people, because if I hadn't heard it, then I know other moms haven't heard it either.
I feel like it's so tough because you're almost like embarrassed to admit this is happening, right? You want to be this strong mama, especially for your first one. You're like, I got this, right? And it's so taboo kind of to talk about this. And so at first you're like, yeah, I don't want to talk about it. And sometimes it takes someone who recognizes it to be like, it's okay.
And I hate that there's a stigma attached. Me too. I hate that because you know, we treat, if you were to break a leg, you treat it. If you have something wrong with your kidney, you treat it. Your brain's an organ too. And for some reason, we cannot wrap our heads around the fact that if we're sick from the neck up, Dr. Dupinski always said that we don't treat it like we do the neck down.
Yeah.
And we need to change that. And talking about it is the first step. But if you're suffering out there, you're not alone. Don't feel ashamed. I get why you would feel ashamed.
Right.
I felt ashamed,
Yeah.
but there's no reason to treat above the neck like you would below the neck.
I always had this like hero complex, like you were just talking
Yeah.
about. Like, I have to do everything by myself. I'm strong for my son. And then my mom said, she was like, how can you take care of him if you're not taking care of yourself?
Amen.
So true. So talk a little bit about what you did for your postpartum depression and how it changed for you the second time around.
Okay, so for me, again, you know, I was like, it was an out-of-body experience, because if it was someone else, I would have gone to them and been like, hey, I can tell that something's wrong. Let's, like your mom, let's call your doctor. But it took a lot out of me. In fact, it was Jeff, my co-host, and his wife, Jordan Schroeder. This is how common it is, right? They had just gone through it. So Jeff, after that segment, said, we need to get you some help. And so I called my doctor and they put me on Zoloft. That's what worked for me. And for everybody, you know, it can be talk therapy, it can be medication. For me, I needed medication. It was very severe. I had suicidal thoughts, and that is not me. So I got on Zoloft, and within like 3 weeks, like, the clouds parted, the sun shined again. I felt so much better. I was present for my child. I wasn't hiding in a closet. And that, again, induces the shame, right? Because you think, I have this child that I've wanted my whole life. And then all of a sudden, you're sitting there crying. You feel like a failure, but you're not.
Yeah.
And then you realize that, oh, this is what motherhood's supposed to be like, right?
Yes, don't
just
suffer in silence. Motherhood's amazing with the right care.
Exactly. So you shared your story. It's so weird because I wrote that little piece out of the middle of nowhere while I was on the show, just feeling like I needed to get it off my chest in the middle of March. And it was just a few days later that you shared your story. And in my mind, I've been thinking, I need to do this series on postpartum depression. This is a big conversation. I kept putting it off and putting it off. And I was like, if this isn't God telling me I need to do this series now, I don't know what is. So you shared your story. And what has it been like since you shared your story?
I remember when you texted me part of what you wrote, and I was like, I relate to every single word you just put down. You know, the feedback has been absolutely incredible. I think maybe I'm a little bit hard in being in news and was kind of bracing myself for the trolls, but all I heard was mom after mom after mom being like, oh my God, I had the same thing. Oh, I had the same thing in the 80s and it went undiagnosed for decades, you know? Or no one ever talked about it this way, but it affected my daughter-in-law or my daughter or myself. And that's when I was like, wow, like how is it that this affects like everyone around me? And we've never talked about it. And the one thing that I wish was that someone had told me beforehand.
Right.
You know, like just sat me down. My doctor had mentioned it, but like somebody that I knew or another mom or another friend had been like, watch for this if it happens. You can handle it. We'll get you the help, you know?
It should be part of prenatal care.
Yeah.
It really should, because if you know those red flags, if you know, oh, I need to get on this or talk therapy, then you know that this is the rubric that you follow in order to feel healthy again.
Right.
Yeah.
And that it's common. Like if you have the conversation ahead of time, you know, like this could happen. It's okay if it happens, and these are the signs.
Exactly.
You know. So what's really interesting is that postpartum depression also affects husbands.
Yes.
In a big way.
Yep.
And they're so often left out of this conversation. So next Thursday for It Takes a Village, our husbands are sharing their story. They're
And
gonna
you invited mine, but mine's a scaredy cat.
and both of ours, we had to convince ours to do it.
We both told the other husband was super into it, and then they got there
And they were
like,
not. No, well done. But their story is really interesting, and so they're going to talk about how they recognized it and how it affected them, and the resources that, you know, how they helped us too. So that's going to be part 2 of It Takes a Village. So thank you guys so much for
Thank
sharing your
you.
story.
Thank
for
you.
this.
You're
for
saving
coming on the
lives.
show.
Yeah,
You really are.
100%.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.